He once silenced an entire boardroom with a single glance, but he couldn't get his own son to look him in the eye even once. He once bought an entire tech company in under 30 minutes, but for over 2 years, he couldn't get that child to utter a single word. Until one cold Tuesday evening in Chicago, when a waitress approached table 14. This isn't just a story about autism. It's the journey of a father who thought money could solve everything, a woman who had lost both her career and her faith in society, and a boy who didn't need either of them to be perfect just to be there, genuinely. When the video ends, you'll understand why love doesn't need to be loud, but it always finds a way to be heard. Have you ever felt like you did everything right, yet still failed at what mattered most? Parenting, connecting, understanding someone you love but can't reach. If you've ever felt that way, this video is for you. Because what happened at table 14 that day didn't just change a father's life. It shook my entire inner world. And it all began with a cold plate of lobster, a child who wouldn't speak, and a woman who once taught, now standing quietly in a restaurant where no one truly saw her. At the top of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, Nathan Calloway sat silently in his walnut-paneled office, looking down at the ant-like stream of cars below. At 44, he was the CEO of a conglomerate with an ecosystem spanning technology, healthcare, and private education. Every meeting he held was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every decision he signed could alter the fate of an entire market. But tonight, he was powerless, not because of falling stocks or some lawsuit, but because Eli, his 7-year-old son, refused to eat dinner for the third time that week. The boy sat hunched in a soft leather chair at La Maison, shaking his head, clutching his ears whenever the clink of cutlery on plates grew too loud. The $250 lobster dish in front of him grew colder by the minute. Nathan glanced at the eyes around them, some pitying, some annoyed. He adjusted his shirt cuff, lips pursed. Eli, eat, son. It's your favorite. People are watching. The boy didn't respond. He didn't cry or scream. He just rocked to his own rhythm, as if the world outside didn't exist. Nathan wasn't a neglectful father. He had taken his son to dozens of doctors, hired the city's most expensive therapists. They recommended sensory toys, adjusted diets, eye contact training. But the results were the same. Eli didn't speak, didn't engage, didn't eat out. And Nathan didn't understand his son. He didn't know where to start. A colleague once said, "You run an empire but can't manage your son's dinner. That hurts more than losing money." And indeed, no billion-dollar deal made Nathan feel as helpless as when Eli turned his back on him. In reality, many wealthy parents in America face similar struggles. Billionaire Elon Musk once shared how challenging it was to raise his autistic son, because money doesn't teach patience or buy a child's language. Nathan's story shows that some doors in life can't be opened with power, only with presence. Not by being right, just by being there. And then, just when Nathan thought he'd hit rock bottom in his helplessness, a woman quietly entered their lives. Not a doctor, not a therapist, just a waitress. Yet she did what all the qualified experts couldn't. And to understand why she was so special, you need to know who she once was. At a glance, people would see her as a black woman in her 30s, hair neatly tied back, white shirt under a wrinkled apron. A nimble waitress, knowing when to smile, how to avoid spilling red wine on a $1,000 suit. But no one saw 10 years ago. She stood before a class of 15 special needs children, reading aloud about a flying elephant, eyes welling up when a student said thank you for the first time. No one knew parents once cried, grasping her hand, saying, "You're why my child could enter elementary school like other kids." And certainly, no one knew the Callaway Corporation, where Nathan was CEO, cut the funding that forced her teaching center to close. Kesha was once a special education teacher, with a master's from the University of Minnesota, vowing to help forgotten children be heard. She had no wealth, no family backing, but she had something many spend a lifetime lacking: empathy. She stood by children who didn't speak, touch, or fit in, and somehow she understood their language through glances, breaths, patience. But then, one day, the budget was cut. The classroom vanished. The center shut down. The children were sent to overcrowded public schools. And Kesha, she became the one holding menus, learning to take orders quickly, smile on cue, and stay silent when needed. In the For You, Simon, Yesarbayurun, nearly 40% of special education teachers quit within their first 5 years, not because they don't love the job, but because the system is too cold to those whose work is full of love, but low on profit. Like Kesha, no one fired her directly, but slowly, there was nowhere left for her to teach. Sometimes the people you pass by daily carry a wealth of knowledge, experience, and a heart that once saved someone. The problem is, we don't ask, we don't look, and we forget a job never fully defines a person. That's why, when Kesha first saw Eli in that restaurant, she didn't see a bad kid or a difficult case. She saw familiar signs. She saw her former students and how Eli curled up, face down on the table, shaking his head in fear. And for the first time in years of being forced to stay silent, Kesha chose to speak, not with words, but with rhythm, with glances, with a lullaby. Because some languages don't need translation, just a heart to feel them. No one thought a high-end restaurant could feel so oppressive for a 7-year-old. That afternoon, when Nathan Calloway entered La Maison with his son, no one immediately recognized him as the powerful CEO of a major corporation. His suit fit perfectly, his leather shoes spotless, his steps confident, like someone used to others stepping aside. But when Eli clung tightly to his sleeve, head bowed, eyes averted, ears covered, every eye in the room suddenly turned to them. They were led to the VIP table by the window, where politicians, celebrities, and stars had dined. But today, it held a silent boy, shrinking from the steady hum of the piano. Eli didn't act out. He didn't scream or run around. But his silence, paired with his anxious posture and soft murmurs, made him impossible to ignore. The clink of cutlery, whispers from nearby tables, the stares of older women as if they'd brought trouble to dinner. Nathan sat across from his son, trying to stay calm. "Eli, look at Dad," he whispered, voice strained. "You like this dish. You ate it at home, remember?" Eli didn't respond. He just covered his ears, curling tighter as if wanting to disappear. This wasn't Nathan's first time in this situation. He'd taken Eli everywhere, psychologists, interventionists, early therapy classes. But every outing for a meal ended the same: Eli didn't eat, didn't engage. And in the end, pitying or annoyed glances from those around. Another father once told him in a private support group, "My son was asked to leave a restaurant just for not sitting still and looking different." That was the first time I felt truly powerless. Even though I'd just been promoted to vice president of the state's biggest bank, the problem wasn't the child. It was the environment. The sounds, the stares. Children on the autism spectrum don't refuse to interact out of stubbornness. The world is too loud, too bright, too fast. The way the chandelier's light flickered through a glass, the harsh clink of a spoon hitting a plate, the soothing jazz that felt like a bomb in a child's head. These are things adults often overlook. It's not that the child didn't fit the place. The place was never designed to welcome children like him. And then, as Nathan was still calculating a new approach, a woman approached. Not a doctor, not a specialist with a name tag, just a waitress in a white shirt, hair neatly tied, holding a tray. But the way she looked at Eli was unlike anyone else in that room. And what she did next wasn't in any psychology textbook. The waitress didn't ask. She didn't greet them as she usually would. Instead, Kesha slowly approached the table, set down her tray, and gently knelt beside Eli. She didn't look at the boy's father like other staff would. She didn't feign cheer or force a smile. She focused on one thing: the trembling child before her. No one in the restaurant understood what was happening. She began to sing. Not loudly, not showy, just a soft melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, but sung differently, lower, slower, like a breath woven with moonlight and gentleness. Eli stopped rocking. His hands stayed on his ears but no longer pressed tightly. His eyes, for the first time that meal, looked directly at the person across from him. Nathan froze. He didn't understand what was happening. His son, the boy who hadn't interacted with a stranger in 2 years, was looking at a woman he'd never met. Kesha didn't speak. She continued the melody, then slowly picked up a small piece of shrimp from the plate, holding it up and tracing a circle in the air just as Eli often did on the table. The shrimp wasn't just food anymore. It was a language, a small dance, a sensory bridge between two worlds. And Eli opened his mouth. It wasn't magic. Kesha used a technique experts call mirroring, mimicking a child's behavior to create safety. Combined with pattern alignment, adjusting rhythm, space, and body language to sync with the child's sensory rhythm. In simpler terms, she entered Eli's world instead of pulling him out of it. Behavioral researchers like Temple Grandin, who lives with Asperger's, have said, when you can't speak their language, speak in the way they feel. They don't need you to teach. They need you to be present, in sync. Connection doesn't come from knowledge, titles, or salary, but from seeing someone as they truly are. And sometimes, to understand someone, you have to kneel and sing. That evening, Eli ate a third of the shrimp plate. Nathan barely blinked throughout the meal. The entire restaurant fell silent, not out of shock, but because they didn't dare disrupt the miracle unfolding. But what Nathan didn't yet know, the woman changing his son's life was the one he had once caused to lose everything. And now, the past would return not for revenge, but to awaken. That night, after tucking Eli into bed, Nathan sat alone in his office on the 61st floor. He held a glass of wine, but his eyes were fixed on the security footage the restaurant manager had sent, capturing the moment Eli ate his first bite from the waitress's hand. No doctor had done that. No specialist. No one. Except her. And then, a name surfaced in his mind, along with a distant memory. Riverside Center. 3 years ago, when the education division of the Callaway Corporation reported prolonged losses, Nathan personally signed off on a restructuring plan. Among it was a small clause, terminate funding for special education centers, failing to meet growth targets. One line, one stamp, one decision, and then everything vanished. Riverside shut down. Dozens of staff were laid off. Over 100 special needs children were quietly transferred. Nathan didn't recall each person, but now he did, vividly. Kesha Williams. She was one of them. In the U.S., many special education centers survive on corporate or state funding. When profit becomes the sole metric, unprofitable centers, despite changing lives, are erased. Not because they failed, but because they didn't make money. In 2019, Illinois closed 12 early intervention centers in one quarter due to budget cuts, leaving over 800 disabled children without support. Those numbers didn't make headlines. They didn't spark outrage. Only small dreams silently extinguished. Some losses can't be measured on a balance sheet. They're measured by each child retreating deeper into their world because no one's left to join them. And now, Nathan faced the truth. The woman who just helped his son was the one he'd erased without a second thought. He'd cut the very bridge his son needed to cross. And ironically, that bridge was still trying to reach back, keeping his boy from falling. But society out there, they don't forget easily. And a media storm was brewing. Someone named just waiting for a spark. It started with a photo. A paparazzo captured Nathan at the table, handing Eli water, while Kesha gently wiped the boy's mouth. The image said little, but it said enough. Billionaire CEO and the black waitress who tamed his son, the first headline on a tabloid, followed by a flood of speculative comments. Some called Kesha a favored servant. Others questioned her inappropriate intimacy. But the most painful part, no one asked about the child. They only debated right or wrong, class or status, position or emotion. And in another corner of the world, the woman who'd abandoned Eli reappeared. Margot, Eli's biological mother, lived in Monaco after the divorce. She'd once said, "I can't live with a child like that. He ruins everything I've built." But now, that photo became her opportunity to return. A lawyer was hired, a lawsuit filed. The reasons: unsuitable nurturing environment, questionable relationship with a low-level employee, risk of psychological harm to a young child. The media exploded. They knew nothing about Kesha, only that she was black, a waitress with no status, someone unworthy of being close to a CEO's son. Meanwhile, Margot, blonde, in an expensive suit, flawless appearance, was suddenly hailed as the mother seeking justice for her child. Truth didn't matter as much as image. The story didn't matter as much as the frame. And society, as always, preferred a lead with a fitting face over a forgotten supporting character. This wasn't the first time. In many cases, black women, especially working-class ones, who enter the orbit of the rich and powerful, are often distorted through a lens of opportunism. In a 2016 case, a black nanny was accused of enticing kids to extort benefits just for hugging a child during a panic attack at daycare. She lost her job. No one apologized. The lesson isn't new. Society pretends to care about the child, but really, they only care about who gets to tell the story. When race, class, and voice intersect, the truth often stands outside the frame. But this time, Kesha wasn't alone. Nathan, who had stayed silent before the media his entire life, finally spoke. He didn't give a long speech, just one sentence to the press. "She didn't replace me as a father. She taught me how to be one." And for the first time, people fell silent. Not because they believed, but because they started listening. That moment led to Kesha being called to testify in court. Not because she was wrong, but because they feared she was right. And the truth, told in the right voice, could shake an entire system. The courtroom was packed that day. Press, media, financial outlets. Even those who never cared about autism showed up, not for Eli, but for Nathan Calloway's name. The Calloway Corporation, the billionaire CEO, the custody battle with his ex-wife. And at the center of it all, a black waitress summoned as a witness. Kesha stepped to the stand in a simple black dress. No makeup, no assistants, no lawyer by her side. She stood there representing no one but herself and the boy who trusted her. Margot's lawyer attacked immediately. They stressed that Kesha was a waitress, untrained, unqualified to intervene in Eli's upbringing. They tried to paint her as a woman exploiting trust, meddling in family matters, forming an unhealthy bond with a child needing stability. But Kesha didn't flinch. She looked straight at them, then at Eli sitting beside Nathan, his small hands lightly gripping his father's sleeve. Then she spoke, her voice calm but resonant. "My name is Kesha Williams. I hold a master's in special education from the University of Minnesota. I was the director of Riverside Center, which supported over 200 autistic children annually. That center closed after its funding was cut by the Calloway Corporation." The courtroom fell silent. She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "I didn't come to take a mother's role. I didn't want to replace a father. I was there because a boy wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, wasn't understood, and I knew how to listen. Not because I'm special, but because I did it every day for hundreds of other kids. Until she turned to Nathan, signed the order to shut down my workplace. He cut the program that his son needed most today." A chill ran through the room. Nathan bowed his head, hands clenched. He remembered clearly the budget cut 3 years ago. A quick decision for profit. He didn't know her when he signed that document. He only saw numbers. But now he saw her face, the consequences, and his son one of those numbers. The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, a reporter whispered, "If she hadn't been a teacher, I'd believe she was one of the greatest human rights activists of the decade." The story was no longer about who raised Eli. It was about who did society empower to make such decisions, and why. When the right people are pushed out of the system, do children bear the consequences? The lesson isn't for one person. It's a reminder to anyone in power. Every line on a page, however neutral, can kill a door of hope someone is trying to keep open. That day, Kesha didn't win the case. She didn't need to. But she made the courtroom remember what mattered most, that those cast out of the game are often the ones holding the key to healing. As she stepped down from the witness stand, Eli ran to her, hugging her as he did in the restaurant. Unfazed by cameras, unafraid of rules. To that boy, she wasn't someone on trial. She was the only one who knelt down and looked at him without judgment. After the trial, Nathan didn't go straight home. He didn't head to the office. He found Keisha sitting alone on the courthouse steps, still clutching the tissue Eli had given her after hugging her off the stand. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. The sound of cars, reporters packing up, the soft wind passing through the stone columns, all formed a necessary silence for a real conversation. Nathan sat beside her, ignoring his wrinkled suit, the curious glances from afar. Then he said, not loudly, not justifying, just three simple words. "I'm sorry." Kesha didn't respond immediately. She tilted her head, looking at him, her eyes neither angry nor relieved. Just the eyes of someone used to people arriving too late. "What are you sorry for?" The question wasn't accusatory. It only sought to distinguish a real apology from a perfunctory gesture. Nathan took a deep breath. He spoke of the decision years ago, how he thought the system would handle it, how he never remembered the faces of those affected until his own son became one of those nameless numbers. He talked about the first time he saw Eli eat, the first time he saw his son look at someone with trust, and it wasn't him. "You did what hundreds couldn't, not for pay, not for a title, but because you saw him as a normal child, and I couldn't do that as his father." The story held no tears, but it held truth. And truth, sometimes, is the clearest apology. In a society where sorry is often a throwaway line in emails or a PR move to calm the public, a true apology is accepting responsibility without expecting instant forgiveness. It's when the speaker doesn't justify, but quietly bears the consequences. In 2020, a major fashion brand CEO faced racism allegations within the company. After rounds of denials, he held private meetings with each affected employee, not to defend or protect the brand, but to listen. A black employee later shared, "It wasn't a press release apology. It was a man hearing my pain that he'd unknowingly caused. Not everyone gets a chance to make amends. But if you do, don't turn it into a transaction. Redemption shouldn't come with an expectation of clearing the debt. It should be the first step to relearn how to be the person you thought you were." As Kesha stood to leave, Nathan added, "I don't want you to go back to waitressing. I want you to be a director." She frowned. "Director of what?" "Whitfield Foundation for programs supporting special needs children. I signed it this morning. Fully autonomous. You have complete control. Not because I want to repay you, but because if I'm truly sorry, I need to start where I caused the damage." For the first time, Kesha didn't argue. She gave a slight nod. Not because she forgave him, but because she heard what Nathan had never said before, not in words, but by stepping back to let someone else step forward. After the trial, Kesha's name appeared across headlines not as a courageous woman, but as the black waitress meddling in a wealthy family's life. The media ignored her master's degree, never mentioned the children she'd taught. They focused on one detail, a black woman, unknown, becoming a key figure in a billionaire's son's life. That was enough for clickbait. Within a week, Kesha was called to the restaurant manager's office 3 times. They didn't dare fire her outright, but her shifts were cut. The VIP tables she once served were reassigned. One evening, in the changing room, someone left an anonymous note. "If you want to play mom to someone else, don't work here." Kesha told no one. She quietly removed her apron, folded it neatly, and quit. No fuss or no complaints. Isira Simmermernon. Just a woman too used to being pushed out after speaking up. In American society, especially for black women in service jobs, the cost of being seen isn't advancement, it's scrutiny, judgment, even retaliation. When they step out of the silent role society assigns, they're not just judged, they're seen as a threat. In 2018, a black teacher in Texas was suspended after reporting a lack of resources for her special needs class. She didn't yell or protest loudly, just sent an internal email. The response from her superiors: "If you feel misaligned with the school's direction, you may consider leaving." She left. And no one mentioned her at that year's graduation, though her students ranked top in the state. Sometimes the price of being seen isn't glory, it's isolation. But if everyone fears being seen, no one will stand for what's right. And if no one stands, no one will kneel to listen. The night Kesha quit, she returned to her small, rented apartment on the south side. Dinner was just cold toast, But her heart felt lighter than any shift, because she knew despite losing her job, despite the gossip, despite being pushed out again this time, at least one person truly saw her Eli. And for the first time in years, she believed that gaze was enough to start again. The next morning at 9 a plain white envelope appeared at her door. No logo. Kurishipinad or just familiar handwriting. I know I can't change the past, but I hope I can return the future that was taken. Inside was a formal contract, executive director of the Whitfield Foundation. Not a gift, but an invitation to start anew in the way she knew was right. On her first day at the new office, Kesha didn't go alone. Nathan was waiting at the door, not to direct or lecture. He dressed simply, holding a canvas bag. Inside, instead of taking the chairman's seat as expected, he pulled up a plastic chair, sat in the back row, and opened a notebook. On the cover, scribbled in pencil, being a father, learning from scratch. No more PowerPoint slides. No more strategy boards. Every morning, he joined Kesha in classes on special needs children. He learned to speak slower, to recognize when Eli was sensory overloaded. He practiced breathing with his son. Sometimes, he just sat beside him, not pushing for words. He began to understand silence has its own language, and sometimes it speaks loudly. Parenting isn't a default title. It's a skill to hone, especially with special needs children. Listening, observing, and adapting matter more than issuing orders like in a boardroom. Nathan once led thousands, but only by starting over did he truly connect with one child, his son. At a center in Oregon, a CEO took a 6-month leave to join his wife in sensory therapy classes for their autistic son. Later, he founded a nonprofit to share this knowledge with other parents. When asked what changed him, he said, "I thought I was the guide. But my son taught me it's about stopping to walk side by side. Being a parent isn't always about teaching. Sometimes it's about learning. Love isn't always speaking up. Sometimes it's sitting quietly without walking away." Nathan no longer calls himself a CEO or sees himself as making amends. He's a father, a man learning to speak softly, to ask questions instead of giving orders. He's realizing power is in control. It's knowing when to set it down to hear a small heart beating to a different rhythm. One Friday afternoon, while the center was still under renovation, Nathan handed Kesha a folder. Inside was the deed to an old building, a former Callaway Corporation office vacant for 5 years. He said, "No profit needed, no reports. We'll rebuild this, not just as a school, but a place where kids like Eli are welcomed even if they don't know how to say hello." Waitress. And so, from a genuine apology, began a reconstruction just as real. The red brick building on 14th Street was once a special education center where Kesha taught her first class 8 years ago. It closed after a budget cut. When she returned, weeds grew taller than the rusted sign. The glass windows were cracked, but Kesha didn't see decay. She saw a child in noise-canceling headphones in the corner, a boy flapping his hands when anxious, a girl drawing her world on the walls with chalk. Just 6 weeks after that conversation, the building became the Whitfield Foundation's first mission. Fully funded by Nathan, Kesha had complete control to redesign the space, but this time, she didn't work alone. She invited former colleagues who'd been laid off, reached out to parents once denied support, and contacted former students, now older, still carrying the silent scars of a system that abandoned them. They painted the walls in soft, soothing colors, lowered the ceilings to reduce echoes, replaced harsh white lights with warm ones, every detail uncrafted with care. Restoration wasn't just about fixing a building, it was about healing trust. In special education, disruption doesn't just steal lessons, it takes away safety, continuity, and sometimes the only hope families cling to. A former student, Malik, once expelled for uncontrollable disruptive behavior, was the first to step into the new center. He didn't hug anyone or speak much, just placed his hand on a wall repainted exactly as it was years ago, and took a deep breath. His mother stood behind, sobbing. "I remember this place," was all Malik said that morning. Some wounds seem small, a closed classroom, a teacher's contract cut, but they leave gaps that linger for years in a child's heart. When adults dare to return and make amends, They restore not just spaces but shattered trust. That afternoon, Kesha quietly hung a small sign in the main hall. For those who were sent away without a goodbye, this is your welcome back. On the center's opening day, all eyes turned to one special figure. Eli, the boy who hadn't spoken a word during that fateful dinner, stood before a small stage, holding a microphone. The room fell silent. Then, in that space, he spoke, not trembling, not coerced, just a simple sentence, enough to choke everyone up. The first room completed in the new center wasn't an office or classroom. It was a small kitchen with a bright window and a table for 6. Kesha chose the same chairs Eli sat in at the restaurant, curved backs, soft cushions, no squeaking when moved. Nathan bought the chandelier from the old restaurant, the one that made Eli flinch for being too bright. This time, he swapped it for soft golden light. The first meal in that kitchen had no honored guests, no wine, no waitstaff. Just Nathan, Kesha, Eli, a few old friends, and 4 new students. They ate chicken sandwiches, drank apple juice, and played a wordless playlist Eli picked because I don't like too many words. No one had to sit properly. No one was forced to make eye contact. One child ate standing. Another used their hands. But everyone ate happily. For the first time, Nathan felt something he'd never truly known. Peace doesn't come from perfection. It comes from being accepted as you are. Many parents of special needs children share their greatest fear of family meals. The clink of cutlery, judgmental stares, whispers from others can make a child feel excluded and parents feel like failures. But if adults adjust the space, rhythm, and expectations instead of forcing kids to conform, meals can become a place to rebuild connection. A 2020 New York survey found 82% of parents with autistic children felt extreme anxiety or stress during meals out. But in adjusted dining models with warm lighting, no background music, no unfamiliar servers, over 60% of children showed more stable behavior. And parental stress dropped significantly. Healing doesn't start with grand gestures. It can begin with a replaced light, a softened sound, or simply eating with a child without demanding they sit straight, use a spoon, or smile. One sunny noon in the new classroom, Eli stepped onto a small stage in the library corner. No one asked. No one forced him. But the boy, once the quietest, most fearful, took the microphone. His first words silenced every adult, not for their eloquence, but for being the truest thing he'd ever said. Eli stood in the quiet room, small hands gripping the microphone. The crowd below froze, as if a single sound might shatter the moment. Nathan stood at the back, hand on his chest. Kesha held still, as if holding her breath for Eli. And then, the boy who hadn't spoken for 4 years looked around, gave a slight nod, and said, "Here, I'm not afraid." 4 words, just social sunmarwin. I turn into an imam, server de mornanon, or simple. No tears, no flourish, but enough to crack every heart in the room. One parent sobbed loudly. A teacher covered their face. Nathan turned away, wiping a tear. Not because the words were extraordinary, but because they were true. And they came from the child everyone thought couldn't speak. For many special needs children, especially those on the autism spectrum, safety matters more than vocabulary or grades. Without a sensory, psychological, and socially safe environment, all lessons become meaningless. I'm not afraid isn't just a linguistic milestone. It's the clearest proof a child has been seen, understood, and accepted. A 2022 California study showed autistic children's speech improved 32% in well-adjusted sensory environments, soft lighting, low noise, flexible schedules. In standard classrooms, the same children's language growth was under 10%. It's not that children don't want to speak. They haven't found a place safe enough to try. When a kind environment is created, even a whisper can awaken society. After Eli's speech, the first to stand and clap wasn't Nathan, but another father who'd repeatedly transferred his bullied child between schools. He turned to Kesha, eyes red, whispering, "You just did what the education system couldn't in 10 years. After that day, Kesha's inbox flooded with hundreds of messages not from reporters, but from parents, teachers, and former Elas of the past. Something unexpected was happening, a small act, a safe room, became the catalyst for a new network where no one feels too different to be loved. A week later, Kesha entered the center's new meeting room, once an old office, now an open workspace. On the large wall behind, the teaching team had hung a wooden plaque, engraved simply, "For those once forgotten and those who chose to see them." She stood silently for a long time. Some moments need no photos, no audience, no likes or shares. Just the knowledge I didn't walk away. Kesha, once fired as non-essential, now runs a special education center, recognized citywide. Nathan, once believing experts could fix anything, learned to step back and let others lead. They didn't swap roles. They restored values the system had deliberately overlooked. Soon after, an independent state education organization awarded Kesha the Woman Rebuilding Community Trust Award, but she didn't attend. Instead, she stayed in class with a new student, a girl who spoke to her after 3 weeks of silence. "The greatest award," Kesha said, "is when a child chooses to trust you." Social change doesn't start with the most talented, richest, or powerful. It begins with those who refuse to ignore, turn away, or accept wrongs as normal. From those who seem small but persist until the world can't ignore them. In that classroom, Eli wrote a line in the corner of the first drawing hung in the center's library. No one told him to "wanish to read tititiri." No one suggested it, but those scribbled words were the key to the entire story. A sentence no one expected, revealing what we've overlooked too long. In a library corner, under the first hung drawing, Eli wrote in crayon a short line that made Kesha cry when she saw it. "If someone sees me, I'll stay." 6 words. But 6 words millions quietly yearn for someone to understand. Not to fix them, not to save them, just to be seen them, to stay. Seeing someone isn't just looking with eyes. It's full presence, pausing, not judging, not rushing to label. It's listening to a story others ignored. It's realizing the waiter, the silent child, or the janitor you never greet carries a universe waiting to be reached. A 2016 Harvard study found children raised in environments with adults who truly see and listen develop social emotional skills 3 times higher than those receiving formal care. It doesn't require expertise, just presence. When you choose to see someone, you don't just acknowledge their existence. You lay the foundation for healing. You tell them, wordlessly, you have value. You are enough. You deserve to stay. Today, someone near you might be quietly hoping to be seen. A waiter, a child at the back of the class, an old friend who rarely speaks. And you, by choosing not to look away, could change their life. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Share this video. Tell this story to someone. And follow Unveiled Wealth, where we keep spreading stories that seem small, but can move the world. The most powerful revolution starts when you choose to see someone and refuse to unsee them.